Sandra Hutchins is determined to make the most of this cruise to the Mexican Riviera. Traveling with co-workers as part of a corporate retreat, Sandra's ready to enjoy some well-deserved time off from the breakneck pace of Silicon Valley. The company is about to go public, and Sandra stands to become very wealthy, along with her business partners. This cruise is all about celebration and well-deserved rest. But the rocky shore of the Baja coast is Sandra's final resting place. Mexican law enforcement need to do detective work here that is nothing short of heroic to find out who killed Sandra Hutchins. What's the motive behind this tragedy? In the end, Sandra herself will tell investigators who kills her. Silicon Valley in the San Francisco Bay, hotbed of technological innovation. In a garage not far from there, Sandra Hutchins and Daryl Smith tried to develop the next killer app.
Sandra always said she was going to change the world. Not in the Bill Gates kind of way, more like an updated Marie Curie where the computers are the lab.
Sandra and Daryl develop software that analyzes and measures a person's vital statistics. It's a class project that becomes a labor of love.
Sandra was one of the first people to develop wearable technology where it would give you information about your health and encourage you to make better choices. So we give you biomedical information such as your heart rate, your pulse, how much activity you've done, how many calories you've burned, that sort of thing. The device that Sandra invented was going to change the face of this type of technology. It was very innovative for its time.
I would always text with Sandra. She said she met Daryl in a coding class at community college. She said that they were the smartest in the class, so it was natural that they teamed up for group assignments. They both wanted good grades, and also, like, they had something to prove. And then they came up with an idea that could make them millions.
It would be 5 years of toil in a San Francisco garage before Silicon Valley discovers them.
I know Sandra found it tough to keep things going while they refined the app. She had to take odd jobs just to pay the bills, but she never lost faith that it would work.
An angel investor contacts Sandra and Daryl and meets them in their garage. Enter Paulo Lindemann, a venture capitalist. He's already heavily invested in a wearable technology company.
The thing that's so amazing about Sandra is her coding ability. So she was rather the brains behind this operation. She created this. This is her baby. And now they have an investor who's looking for just this type of technology. So it's a perfect match.
Paulo Lindemann invests in the startup venture created by Sandra and Daryl, bringing millions in venture capital to the business in exchange for a portion of the ownership.
This is the kind of thing people dream about when they dream of having a big invention. Her life changed overnight. They went from 2 kids coding in a garage to having to employ 200 people. Very quick changes to her life. But still, at her heart, Sandra's someone who would like to just be left alone at the spotlight, happily coding away, while her partner is more interested in having a public persona and being out in front of the media.
A year later, the startup announces an initial public offering, which could be worth upwards of $1 billion.
Going public is cause for a great celebration for this team. It means that they're going to be set for life, basically. They're not going to have any financial worries whatsoever, and any costs that they do have, the investor will cover. So it's a great excuse to celebrate. Any investment that Paulo has made is going to come back to him tenfold, so really there's no risk involved.
Sandra texted me that she was very happy about the money they got, but mainly because it meant that she could keep coding without having to do all those other odd jobs.
To celebrate their success, the 3 owners of the business take their 200 employees on a corporate retreat. They set sail on a 9-day cruise, departing from San Francisco. They visit multiple Mexican destinations, including a 2-day stay in Cabo San Lucas, before heading home. The entire company is ready for some fun in the Baja California sun. Even the indoor types, like Sandra.
Paulo is so convinced that his investment is going to pay off in a big way. He's the one that foots the bill for all 200 employees of the company to be on this cruise. That's a considerable expense, but he's not concerned about it because he knows the money's going to come back to him in a big way.
Sandra and Daryl enjoy their time on the cruise and celebrate with some drinks on the deck of the ship.
I had a feeling she was gonna cut a little loose on that boat. She deserves some fun.
For the first time, Sandra opens up and allows herself to have some fun. Unfortunately, terrible things are in store for Sandra.
Sandra was never a fan of boats. She would always stay inside when the rest of us went out on my dad's boat. She was more comfortable in front of a computer than out in nature.
Sandra puts on seasickness bands. They are acupressure bands that fit around a patient's wrist to reduce nausea.
So seasickness is real. It's not just something that means you're weak or you can't take it. It's actually a very real phenomenon where the balance in your inner ear is affected. So even really seasoned sailors can go through this if the cruise is rough enough or the sail is rough enough. It doesn't just affect newbies or rookies about ocean voyages, it can affect anyone.
Daryl and Sandra get some fresh air exploring the deck of the ship to help subdue Sandra's seasickness.
She told me that she had feelings for Daryl. When you're working that close for that long with someone, it's almost inevitable that you'd form a strong bond. They needed each other. They might not have been intimate, she never told me details, but they were close.
When the cruise sets sail for Mexico, Sandra doesn't contact her family, but her family doesn't think it's unusual.
I wasn't expecting to hear from her when she got on the cruise. I have no doubt there was internet access. It's a cruise full of coders, but I just wanted her to have fun, so I didn't mind that I didn't hear from her.
Sandra's family may not expect to hear from her, but they can expect a call from the police. What has happened to Sandra Hutchins? Computer programmer Sandra Hutchins is about to become Silicon Valley's latest startup millionaire. She helps create software that analyzes vital signs for wearable tech. Normally the indoorsy type, Sandra goes on a cruise to celebrate her company's initial public offering. Sandra's life is cut tragically short. Her body is found on the beaches of the Baja California Peninsula on the west coast of Mexico, 50 miles north of Cabo San Lucas.
Yeah, we have Mexican authorities who, this one officer in particular, has located a body floating in the water just off the coast of Mexico in the area in which he works. He's unable to identify her, and she doesn't look like she should be anywhere near the water. Doesn't have any identification on her, and certainly doesn't look like she's dressed to be swimming. The one thing he does notice is that she's got these red bands on her wrists, and they're identified as seasickness bands, which gives him an idea that she may have come from a cruise ship that's either nearby or has gone by in the recent past. She's either been put there or fallen there. She's drowned, possibly somehow. He's just unable to figure out why she's in fact in the water.
Investigators have their work cut out for them. Looking into a passenger who has gone overboard is no easy task.
Well, this is something that is very difficult to deal with, especially in the absence of any witnesses. Physical evidence may be hard to find, if there is any at all. What there is may not be preserved to be analyzed at a later time. If you don't know what you're looking for, you don't know to look for it. That would be the simplest way to put it.
Investigators immediately think of the nearby cruise ship destination of Cabo San Lucas to start their search for a possible missing passenger.
Cabo San Lucas is a very popular tourist destination. Thousands of tourists go through it every year. So when a body is found, it's a natural assumption to think that it's probably that of a tourist.
After requesting entry to any cruise ship currently docked outside of Cabo San Lucas, the Mexican police takes another look at this unidentified body.
Luckily, in this case, the police officer in charge of the investigation is very committed to his job. He's very thorough, he's very detail-oriented. This is the type of person you want investigating if anything should happen to you.
Typically, bodies that are located in a body of water that have perhaps been there for some time present difficulties in terms of investigative value. Evidence is often washed away. Identification of that person becomes difficult depending on the state of decomposition. Even obtaining something like fingerprints becomes much more difficult. It can be done, but it's not something that is easily done. Those fingerprints could be searched on various databases, both in Mexico and in the United States, internationally. Any law enforcement agency would have the ability to search for those records.
Fingerprints are crucial when it comes to identifying someone. Unfortunately, not everybody is in a database, so even if your fingerprints are viable after being in the water, there might not be any record of you. In that case, dental records often are the key to identifying a victim.
Beneath the fingernails, the police officer discovers several orange fibers from some type of fabric or clothing. The officer discovers a second sign of struggle.
In this particular instance, there aren't a lot of injuries on the body, and as he examines it, he notices a very thin red mark on her neck that indicates strangulation.
This is not a typical August evening for this police officer stationed in rural Mexico, who now believes he has a murder victim on his beach.
The Mexican law enforcement official, because he works in this area, is familiar with, the shoreline and the currents and the tides. He's got to try to determine where did this body come from. And knowing that the tides or the currents in this particular location run along the California coast from north to south, he would have to realize that it's come from somewhere north of his location. It could have been 100 miles from there where she first entered the water. He just doesn't know at this point.
There's a couple pieces of evidence that seem very critical in this case. One, they find orange fibers underneath Sandra's fingernails. So this could mean that she tried to fight off an attacker. And the second, the most crucial, is that she had a thin red line across her neck, about the thickness of a wire, which could mean that she was strangled or restrained in some way around the neck.
Mexican police believe this cruise ship passenger met with foul play. But even though she has been washed ashore by the waves of the Pacific, the Mexican police doesn't believe she is drowned.
One of the ways a coroner can tell if someone died of drowning is if there's water in the lungs. Since there was no water in Sandra's lungs, that means that she was most likely dead when she was thrown overboard.
Will investigators discover the identity of Sandra? How will they find out where she came from? And what will they do to track down her murderer? Tech entrepreneur Sandra Hutchins washes up on a Mexican beach. Her company is on a cruise to celebrate their initial public offering, where she's thought to have gone overboard. At this point, investigators do not know who was washed up on their beach, but they're convinced it's a murder case. Fibers under Sandra's fingernails and a thin red mark across her neck lead investigators to believe she'd been strangled. Although Sandra's been dead in the water for an undetermined amount of time, investigators retrieve her fingerprints in an attempt to identify her. In the early hours of that morning, investigators run the prints through Interpol's international database of fingerprints, hoping for the good fortune of a match.
The officer has discovered that her fingerprints were submitted as a result of a security clearance that she obtained for employment purposes. And we know that only about 20% of all the fingerprints on file are as a result of non-criminal events. So it's unusual that she's in there, but he's lucky to have found the fingerprints.
One of Sandra's odd jobs was with the county sheriff's office to monitor their vitals when they're out on patrol. I guess she must have got security clearance at some point.
Yeah, on a database like this, you would surrender your fingerprints for a background check so that other police agencies or your employer could check your criminal history for the purposes of employment.
Instead, Mexican officials must call Sandra's next of kin with tragic news. From the National Integrated Biometrics Database, investigators get the name of Sandra's software company. Investigators track down the cruise that Sandra's company's on and send an officer out to the ship. Law enforcement arrive on the cruise ship, anchored at Cabo San Lucas. The crew is eager to stay on schedule, but grant the Mexican authorities access to the ship's security to move things along.
The visit from the Mexican police is a big surprise to the ship's crew because they're not aware that anything's gone wrong. They don't even know that Sandra's been missing. But when the police press them to check the records, they do find out that there is a Sandra Hutchins on board.
After confirming the identity of Sandra Hutchins, investigators dig deeper to find out what happened to Sandra.
Investigators on board the ship would have several tools available to them to be able to figure out where this person had been, when she may have left the ship, got on the ship by use of her scan cards. But also there is video surveillance all over the ship that would allow them to track her movements on board.
A room key search indicates Sandra didn't enter or exit her cabin a single time while on the ship. However, investigators do find 2 transactions on the card, proving she did board and use her card. First, a purchase of 1 tropical cocktail on the first day. The second, the purchase of 2 buffet meals later that day.
The first bit of information they're able to find is that she used her scan card at the buffet on the first day of the cruise at about 5:30 p.m. They were then able to look at the video footage and correlate the information.
The last known whereabouts of Sandra Hutchins is at the ship's dining hall, where she purchases a meal for Daryl Smith.
The investigation immediately focuses on the person who was closest to Sandra, her business partner, Daryl. But the thing the investigators don't know at this point is there was actually a romantic relationship between Daryl and Sandra. So that could have had something to do with it. It could have been a crime of passion.
Investigators close in on Daryl Smith, the prime suspect in Sandra's murder. Could Daryl's relationship with Sandra push him to do the unthinkable? He doesn't strike a very threatening impression to the investigators. Daryl admits he and Sandra had been romantic, and she stayed in his cabin on the first night. But Daryl claims Sandra breaks up with him the next day.
Investigators are always going to look first at someone who's had a close relationship with the victim. It's traditional that when we die, if something happens to us, if we're murdered, it's usually the person closest to us. So Daryl is automatically going to be of suspicion. Now we find out he never reported Sandra missing. He didn't show any concern when she disappeared. So right away, this makes him look even more suspicious.
Could heartbreak have been a motive for Daryl to murder Sandra? Investigators follow their moments after the buffet dinner on the first night.
Some of the important things investigators want to look at is who the victim had relationships with on board and what type of relationships they were. In this particular case, Sandra and Daryl came on the ship together as co-workers. At least it was believed that they were just co-workers. But video footage actually showed them walking hand in hand at one point, which would indicate that they had more than just a professional relationship.
Understandably, Paulo's pretty upset with these developments. First of all, he had no idea that Sandra and Daryl were in a relationship, so he's pretty upset about this. It doesn't seem professional to him. And then to have Daryl, somebody he's now in business with, accused of this crime, this isn't something he wants to be involved with at all. At this point, he's regretting being an investor in this company.
In an attempt to assist investigators, Paulo supplies them with the vital statistics for Sandra using the company's app. They see readouts of her historical heart rate, blood pressure, steps, and flights of stairs climbed.
One of the interesting things that this wearable tech tracks are one's vitals, such as your heartbeat, your calories burned, the number of steps you may take in a given day. The data showed that the wearable tech she had stopped collecting data at about 1 a.m. on the day that she was found.
The cruise is on its 6th day. According to Paulo's data, Sandra went missing on the 4th day. This means Sandra has already been missing for 2 days. The ship's chief of security and the Mexican investigator find it odd no one reported her missing. Investigators search the cameras around the time that Sandra's vitals come to an end. What they find is Daryl exiting the cabin. Investigators search Daryl's room, hoping for signs that Sandra had been there. Suspecting Daryl may have thrown Sandra overboard on the 4th night, investigators check the camera covering his balcony, but the search comes up empty.
They're investigating to see if maybe Sandra could have been held captive. Like, was he angry that she jilted him? Did something go horribly wrong during the breakup? Or is there some sign of struggle in the cabin? This is the two things they're looking for.
What investigators find tucked beneath Daryl's mattress is an unusual item, a white plastic shopping bag.
Some of the things investigators look at are the pieces of evidence that are found and, what their relationship might be to the case that they're investigating. In this particular instance, a white shopping bag was found in an unusual location, that being under the mattress in the room they were searching. Why a shopping bag would be located in this particular spot is interesting. It certainly raises more questions than it does provide answers.
The two most common reasons of murdering someone are love or money. In this case, the police are convinced it's love. They think Daryl is their man. But Sandra's going to send them a message from beyond the grave to tell them otherwise. It wasn't love, it was money.
The message sent by Sandra posthumously may be exactly what the investigators need to crack this case. Sandra Hutchins is a Northern California software developer whose Silicon Valley startup has just gone public. Her business partner, Daryl Smith, has grown to become her romantic partner. Love gone bad may have cost Sandra her life. Is Daryl guilty of a crime of passion?
Daryl seems like the perfect suspect. He had opportunity, he was closest to Sandra, he knew her movements best, and he probably had the strongest motive of anyone on board, so we think.
With no hard evidence, investigators can only speculate that Daryl murdered Sandra. They need more answers before they can make an arrest.
So at this point of the investigation, we have Sandra's body. We don't have any signs of a struggle. We don't have any footage of her going overboard, but we know she came from this particular ship. And we have this plastic bag that's been located in an unusual spot. Now, because it's a plastic bag, it's certainly possible for fingerprints to be lifted off the bag to determine who had the bag and what they may have used it for.
There's a lot of pressure whenever a crime takes place on a cruise ship. They have a schedule they've got to keep. There's tons of people on board that are essentially held captive while an investigation is going on. They're very eager to get home. Other ships need to get into the same port. So it's a lot of pressure on investigators to try and clear up something maybe a little bit quicker than they ordinarily would have liked to.
With time running out before the ship must head back to San Francisco, a new clue sends investigators in a completely different direction.
My mom told me that Sandra's mom got an envelope about a year before the cruise that said to open it if anything happened. Apparently Sandra had some sort of feeling, but hoped that her mom would never have to open it. But after Sandra died, her mom did open it.
Inside the envelope, Sandra's mother finds a key to a safety deposit box and a letter that gives her clear instructions on what to do.
We thought there might be money in it or something like that, but the only thing in it was paperwork that showed that Sandra's business was a complete lie.
The emails Sandra archived tell a story of how the Vital Statistics app did not work. As the deadline approaches for the company to go public, Paulo instructs Sandra and Daryl to simply fake the numbers.
A secret pact has been uncovered. It turns out that the software that everybody's pinning their hopes and dreams on doesn't actually work. The data that's coming back from the people wearing it is not correct. This really obviously concerns Sandra, but Paulo is under pressure. He wants everything to go through. He's determined to keep to schedule, so he urges her to keep the data a secret. Basically, they all agreed to commit fraud.
The cache of damning emails leads investigators to believe Paulo fed them false statistics to cover up what really happened to Sandra on board the ship. Perhaps Sandra dies a lot sooner than the fourth night of the cruise, as Mexican law enforcement initially suspect.
One of the pieces of information investigators are using to try to establish when Sandra may have died is the data collected from her wearable device, and they believe it stopped at a certain time. But in looking further into it, it appears now that the information may be compromised, that it may have been in fact altered by Paolo to throw investigators off by changing when the information was collected. We know she was still wearing it at the time she was found. It's not a case of it being removed from her body, but the data itself has been altered.
With this newly discovered information, what part did Paolo play in Sandra's death? Are Paolo and Daryl working together? Software developer Sandra Hutchins develops a killer app that could net her millions of dollars. Sandra's business partner, Daryl Smith, becomes her romantic interest. When Sandra washes ashore, the evidence leads investigators to Daryl. But the key to a safety deposit box left by Sandra for her mother, only to open if something happens to her, exposes the startup as a fraud. Majority investor Paolo Lindemann becomes suspect number one in Sandra's murder. Did Paolo Lindemann murder Sandra Hutchins and then set Daryl Smith up to take the fall for it?
Paolo's looking like a pretty good suspect. There's a lot of money on the line here. But the question is, was it enough for him to orchestrate this entire cruise just to murder Sandra? That's a lot of other people to get involved. You would think that maybe he would just bring Sandra and Daryl on the cruise if he intended all along to kill her.
At the time Sandra's body was found, the Mexican official did an examination of her body, and one of the things he did was check under her fingernails, because this often can help establish that there was a struggle. What he located at that time were some orange fibers. Didn't know where the orange fibers came from, but he retained them as potential evidence. So the orange fibers in and of themselves don't provide us anything other than the fact that it indicates there's a possible struggle was involved. The more investigators look into the people who they consider suspects, in this particular case, Paolo is somebody they believe may have altered the data being recorded from her wearable device. They now determine that he, in fact, doesn't even have a clue about how to write this type of computer code. So the likelihood of him being able to alter the data is very slim.
After investigators determined Paolo could not have altered Sandra's data, police have a good hunch that Paolo may be working together with Daryl to get rid of Sandra. Still missing a piece of the puzzle, investigators scramble to retrace the steps of Paolo. Finally, in camera footage the investigators have already reviewed, they spot the break in the case they've been so desperate to find.
Police find something on the surveillance tapes that make them believe that perhaps Daryl and Paolo were working together to get rid of Sandra. At the buffet line, they're pretty sure that Paolo mouths the word "tonight" to Daryl. They're not entirely 100% clear on what that means, but it's enough of a clue for them to take a closer look at maybe the fact that they're working together.
Video footage reveals Sandra and Daryl walk past Daryl's cabin on the first night and take the elevator to room 1201, to the cabin where Paolo Lindemann awaits. Daryl is brought back in for questioning and is asked why they go there. Daryl is aware that the police know about the fraudulent data recording. He decides to tell investigators that they all spoke earlier the first day while they were playing badminton. Paulo invited them to his cabin so they could speak more about how they were going to move forward.
The investigation has revealed that Paulo is sort of the money guy in this operation. He's the one backing this new technology and this new computer application. And as a result of that, they also discovered that he in fact has 4 rooms on the cruise ship registered to him. So that helps him covering any tracks he may have left behind in terms of his involvement in this murder.
Investigators scramble to find balcony footage from Paulo Lindeman's cabin on the first night of the cruise.
The investigation at this stage isn't really confirming anybody as a positive suspect. We don't have any eyewitness to Sandra's murder. We don't have an eyewitness to her going overboard. So at this point, new information needs to come forward to help move this investigation along.
Without proof that Sandra went overboard from room 1201, investigators fear there's too much doubt to convict Paulo or Daryl for Sandra's murder, let alone both of them. When investigators track down the camera footage from the balcony of room 1201, they discover a camera malfunction. There's no video to be searched from this camera. The search for justice in Sandra Hutchins' murder comes to a screeching halt. As investigators search for the final link to connect Paulo Lindeman and Daryl Smith to the murder of Sandra Hutchins, they hit a snag. The camera trained on Paulo's balcony isn't working. Investigators try to piece together a timeline of events and find some things that don't add up. If Sandra hasn't been seen since the first night, how does Sandra break up with Daryl the second morning? Why doesn't anyone else from the company question their boss Sandra's disappearance? Why wasn't the security camera working on Paulo's balcony? Investigators scanned the footage of the balcony cameras for every cabin below room 1201. After minutes of frantic searching, the investigation nets a sequence of balcony cam footage clips that finally connects the dots.
The investigators are able to find video footage from cabins below Paulo's cabin. And these video images are able to show Sandra falling or going overboard sequentially from cabin to cabin to cabin directly below Paulo's cabin. Additionally, they've also been able to establish that Paulo, Daryl, and Sandra were all in that cabin at the same time just before she went overboard.
Based on where Paulo's cabin was, it seems that Sandra's body was thrown into the ocean from Paulo's room based on how far it had to fall. Being wealthy, of course, Paulo went for the penthouse suite, so there's no higher than his cabin.
The investigators have what they need to make an arrest, but they decide to try to get one of the suspects to confess so they have the story right. Daryl is brought in first and comes clean. He explains to the investigators that he and Sandra did have a fight on the first night. She wanted to have a working app and not a lie. Paulo didn't want Sandra to jeopardize the company when they went public, so he booked a company cruise where they could get rid of Sandra. After the deed was done, company members were told seasickness got the best of Sandra and she stayed in her room. Daryl goes on to tell investigators Paulo called in some favors to have his balcony camera broken. After Daryl confesses to police, they have all they need. Mexican federal police charge Paulo Lindemann and Daryl Smith with first-degree murder, as well as conspiracy to commit murder. The U.S. Securities Exchange Commission is notified of the company's fraudulent activities.
The murder weapon, essentially, is incredibly important in this type of investigation. It may reveal clues as to who committed the murder. There may be traceable evidence on that weapon that points to a particular suspect. The plastic bag that was found under Daryl's bed between the mattresses was examined again, and they were able to establish that both Daryl's fingerprints and Paulo's fingerprints were on that bag. More so, they were able to link that plastic bag to the marks on Sandra's neck, establishing that that was in fact the murder weapon.
Leaving the plastic bag that murdered Sandra under Daryl's bed suggests Paulo may have been trying to frame Daryl. Fortunately for police, many mistakes were made and justice will be served. Paulo Lindemann and Daryl Smith are found guilty, convicted of all charges in the murder of Sandra Hutchins. They will both spend life in prison for the multiple crimes they have committed.
This was an elaborate conspiracy to commit the murder of one person. Imagine how conniving you'd have to be to involve 200 other people just to cover your tracks. If it weren't for the work of such dedicated investigators, this crime might have gone unsolved. The stakes were high and lots of money was on the line.
Sandra knew that she was in way too deep with the app and the company. She just wanted to code. She didn't sign up for anything else. I just wish she would have told me or someone about how she was feeling about them. I still miss her.
Sandra set out to change the world. Instead, her life is cut tragically short. Her company has folded, and her partners will spend the rest of their lives in jail. Her family suffers a great loss, but Sandra's letter helped put the right people in jail.